Welcome to Narayana AS Academy Daily Current Affairs session. Let me introduce myself before going to discuss about today's current affairs. I am Srinivas Raju. I have appeared for civil services interview twice, once in 2016 and again in 2017. I have been teaching for civil services for the past 3 years. I am going to discuss about the today's important current affairs from both the Hindu and Indian Express newspaper. Criminalization of politics. Let me first define what is criminalization of politics. Criminalization of politics means participation of criminals in the political process. That is nothing but MPs and MLAs having criminal cases pending against them. And if we see the data of Association for Democratic Reforms, then we will understand the gravity of the situation. Okay? In 2009, 30% of the MPs, close to 30% of the MPs are having criminal cases against them. Okay? And among them, 14% are facing serious criminal offences. This serious criminal offences means rape, murder, crimes against women. They are very serious offences. This and 14% of the MPs are facing these charges. And in 2014, 34% of the MPs are facing criminal charges, and out of them, 21 are facing serious criminal cases. And in 2019, 43% of the MPs are facing criminal charges, and out of them 29% are facing serious criminal cases. See the gravity of the situation. Okay? Out of 545 MPs, 43% of them are facing criminal offences, and 29% are out of 43%, 29% are facing serious criminal offences. That is the level of this crime in the political process. Now we will see the reasons for the criminalization of politics. We will look into the reasons for criminalization of politics. The first important factor is winnability factor. You know, every political party feel the candidates, we have the capability to win the elections. You know, these politicians with criminal background are the criminals with political aspiration. You know, with the help of huge muscle and money power, have huge chances of winning the elections. That is why they are fielded by the political parties. You know, winnability factor is one of the reasons. And second factor is poor functioning of the Election Commission of India. And we know that this Election Commission of India is a constitutional body and very important body under Article 324 of the Constitution of India. And the prime objective of this Election Commission of India is to ensure free and fair elections. To ensure free and fair elections. As a part of this process, it enforces moral code of conduct. And we know that due to this improper enforcement or poor enforcement of moral code of conduct, there is a lot of incidents like booth capturing, rigging. You know, these incidents are very common in electoral process, and these are majorly committed by these criminals. You know, with the support of politicians to win the elections. That is also one of the reasons for criminalization of politics. And the third is weaknesses in the criminal justice system. We know that criminal justice system has three important elements. One is investigative agencies like police, second is courts to trial the cases, and third is prison for reforms. You know, these politicians with criminal background try to interfere in the investigation process. At the same time, due to lack of sufficient infrastructure, due to lack of sufficient courts, these trials are not taking place within the time. No, that is also one of the reasons for criminalization of politics. And if we see the problem, and if you see there is a problem with the functioning of political parties. You know, what is the main aim of political party? To form the government. To form the government, they need the sufficient number of candidates who have won the election. And these politicians with criminal background are criminals. They have the huge chances of winning elections, that we have already discussed. That's why they give tickets to these candidates. That is also one of the reasons for increased participation of criminals in the elections. And also societal acceptance. In the society also we are accepting and we are voting these people with criminal background. That is why they are getting elected. That is also leading to the increased participation. And also fear factor. These criminals, they threaten the people. You know, they resort to the threat. They resort to the fear, not to get elected. That is also one of the reasons. No, politician criminal nexus. These politicians take the help of criminals to win the election. At the same time, criminals need the politician support to actually escape from the law. That is why they are coming together. You know, that is also leading to the politicization of criminals or criminalization of politics, and also hesitation of honest people's participation in elections. If you see that honest peoples are not coming and participating in elections, mainly because they know that there is a lot of money and muscle power involved, and we don't have that power. That is why they are not coming and contesting the elections. That is also one of the reasons for the increased participation of criminals in the elections. And now we will go to the impact of criminalization of politics. What is its impact on the society? Law breakers will become lawmakers. Who are these criminals? These people have broken the law, have violated the law. That is why they are facing criminal charges, and they will become the lawmakers. As a part of the parliament or state legislative body, they will become the lawmakers, because the primary function of those legislative bodies is to make the law. As a part of that, they will play an important role in the law making process. And second is increased levels of corruption. These politicians, these politicians with criminal charges, they will raise the levels of corruption in the administration to promote their interests. That will lead to the increasing levels of corruption, and also weakening the criminal justice system. They don't want the criminal justice system to be strong enough. If it becomes strong, then they will be put behind the bars. That is why they try to weaken the criminal justice system, like interfering in the investigative process, or giving post to the people who are very near to them, or who are favoring to them. And also this loss of public trust in democratic institutions. If the parliament or state legislative bodies are occupied with these criminal people who are committing various atrocities in the society, and if the public see them in the democratic institutions like parliament, people will lose faith in those institutions, and also the democratic political process also. Okay, and also it discourages the honest people entry into politics, because honest people won't contest elections, because they know that it is all about money and muscle, and they don't have those powers. That's why they don't come and participate in the elections. They will scare of these processes. And also abusing power authority to promote their interests. These people will also abuse the power and authority as a part of the government, as a part of their position as an MP and MLA. They will abuse their power and authority to promote their interests. And what is the main important impact? It will lead to increased crime rate in the society. These people who are facing serious criminal charges will promote that crime culture in the society, that will lead to more crimes in the society due to the weakening criminal justice system, like police, courts, prisons. Okay, these are the main impacts of criminalization of politics. Now we will look into the measures that were taken till now to deal with criminalization of politics, or to decriminalize the politics. And we can see these measures under three heads. One is constitutional measures. What are the measures that were there in constitution to deal with criminalization of politics? Article 102 of the Constitution of India deals with disqualification on certain grounds for the members of parliament, and Article 191 of the Constitution of India deals with disqualification on certain grounds for the state legislative assemblies. And okay, that is the constitutional part. Now we will see the legislative measures to deal with criminalization of politics. Representation of People Act 1951 bans convicted persons from contesting elections. Okay, that is the major law that deal with criminalization of politics. And judiciary has also been very active in this decriminalizing politics, and it has come out with various judgment over a period of time to decriminalize the politics. First important judgment is Association for Democratic Reforms versus Union of India case. In this case, it has asked the people who are filing nominations, come out with an affidavit. They have to submit an affidavit. That affidavit should contain their assets, liabilities, and the criminal cases pending against them. Okay, that is one of the main important judgment. And the next important judgment is Lily Thomas case in 2013. In this case, the Supreme Court said that the MPs and MLAs who are convicted with 2 years or more than 2 years imprisonment, they have to vacate their seat immediately. Once they are convicted with 2 years or more imprisonment, their seat will become automatically vacant. Okay, And in the PUCL case, you know, People's Union for Civil Liberties case, the Supreme Court has come out with nota, you know, none of the above provision. In this PUCL case, the Supreme Court has introduced the nota provision, none of the above provision. Now, if you don't like to choose anyone, you can just opt that provision. Okay, and PIF case, Public Interest Foundation case in 2018, you know, that is the recent judgment. In that judgment, Supreme Court said that it has asked the political parties to publish the criminal records of their candidates, and also the reasons for selecting them over the others, you know. And also in this year also, Supreme Court many times said that there is a need to complete the trial in these cases in a time bound manner, you know. That is very important to decriminalize the politics. These are the various measures that we have taken till now, but still this trend is going on. We will see what needs to be done. Now we will see what needs to be done to decriminalize the politics. First one is state funding of elections. We know that election is all about money, election is all about this muscle power, and the honest people don't have that much money to contest in the elections, and due to this money power, these criminal elements and these politicians with criminal track record are coming and contesting elections. And if we provide the funds as a part of the state, then honest people, there will be a chance of encouraging honest people also come and contest the elections. That way we can go for decriminalization of politics. And second is strengthening Election Commission of India. There is a need to strengthening Election Commission of India to make sure that it will implement the model code of conduct in an efficient and effective manner. At the same time, Election Commission of India has only the power of registering the parties. Here what we need is, we need to strengthen it by giving the power to deregister the parties. If the parties are continuously giving tickets to these criminal elements or encouraging criminal elements, then it should have the power to deregister them. That is also very important. Okay, and also behavioral change. Okay, if a particular party feels this criminals, then the people should be aware of it. No, people, there is a need to bring about change in the behavior of the people. They should not support them and they should not vote them. That awareness and that behavioral change among the people is very important to decriminalize the politics. And also in recent judgment also, the Supreme Court said that mere legislative and judicial measures are not enough, and also convicting the politicians with criminal background is not enough to decriminalize the politics. We need to cleanse the political party system. You know, we need to bring about transparency and accountability. We need to bring about democracy within the political party system to decriminalize the politics, because it has very important role to play. Regional comprehensive economic partnership. The idea of this was first mooted at the 19th ASEAN Summit, you know, that took place in 2011. Since then, the negotiations have been going on for this agreement. What is this? It is mainly an economic cooperation among the 16 countries, 10 Asian countries plus 6 countries with which it has free trade agreements. You know, what are the 6 countries? Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Korea, China and India. These are the 6 countries with which the ASEAN has FTA agreements. These 16 countries wanted to form an economic cooperation, you know, wanted to form an partnership and wanted to form an economic union to promote their interests. This regional comprehensive economic partnership was mainly pushed by China to counter US-led Trans-Pacific Partnership. Now we will see what it is. You know, what is the importance of RCEP? It is the largest regional trading agreement till now. It is the largest regional agreement till now, and it accounts for almost half of the world's population. You know, these 16 countries represent half of the world's population, and also these 16 countries contribute 1/4 of world's exports. See the level of potential, you know, 50% of the population are contributing only the 1/4 of exports. There is a huge potential that can be tapped with this partnership. and also they are contributing only 30% of GDP, they are contributing 30% of GDP. Still there is a potential to increase it. That is the importance of this RCEP. Now we will see the objectives of RCEP. What are the objectives of RCEP agreement? To create an integrated market, to create a common market, to create a common market within these 16 countries in the region. That is the main important aim, to create an integrated market, common market. Okay, and also to make it easier for products, to make sure that the products of each country are easily available in the market within the region, to make sure that the products of each and every country, the goods and services are available easily, flowing, seamless transfer of goods and services within the region, and also to promote economic cooperation across the region. These three are the important objectives of the RCEP. Now we will see the negotiations have been going on. In 2019 November, India came out of these negotiations. It said that India's concerns were not raised by these negotiations. That's why we are not interested to be a part of this agreement. We will see what are those concerns. Inadequate protections against surge in imports. These negotiations did not address these measures. The measures that need to be put in place to deal with the surges in imports. And this RCEP has this China. China is known for this flooding their goods and services in the other markets. And if we don't have these measures to deal with those surge in imports, then our market will be flooded with the products of the other countries that will threaten our domestic industry. That is why India wanted protections, and these protections were not addressed by these negotiations. And also second one is auto trigger mechanism. What is auto trigger mechanism? If we import if our imports from other country crosses certain threshold, then these tariffs will be automatically increased on those products, on those products from that particular country, to deal with surges in imports. This mechanism was also not addressed by these negotiations. And third one is MFN status, most favored nation status. Generally, we give this most favored nation status to the countries with which we have strategic interests or geopolitical reasons. And as a part of this RCEP, they may force India to grant this status to the other countries in the region. China is there, with which we have border problem, and if we grant this status to China, it may exploit Indian market and it may threaten our safety and security and sovereignty of India. That is why India is worrying about this MFN status, and also lack of clear assurance over market access. The countries in the region, the other participants in the negotiations are not assuring the market access, and if we don't give access to their market, then India will be at disadvantaged position. India is a leader in service sector, and if they don't give access to their market, then we cannot utilize that partnership. That is why India is also worrying about that measure. And also India's trade deficit with the Asian nations and other members. India has free trade agreement with these Asian nations, and it is not satisfactory. If you see the imports and exports over a period of time, our exports are lesser than the imports. We are importing more from the Asian countries than exporting. And now if we become part of this RCE agreement and if we open our market, then there will be a threat of more imports than exports. That is also one of the concerns. And also that with China we have huge trade deficit, and if we open our economy to China, that will also lead to a lot of trade deficit. And also flood of Chinese goods. And if we relax the trade barriers and non-trade barriers, then there may be a threat of this dumping of used Chinese goods into Indian market. That is also one of the concern. Due to these concerns, these concerns are not addressed by these negotiations. India did not sign the agreement. Recently in the November month itself, the agreement was signed. But India stayed away from that agreement and did not sign it, despite being a member since beginning. Now we will check the impact of this agreement on India's interest. What are the positive impacts, and next up we will see the negative impacts. Positive impact means if you become a member of this if you become member of this RCEP, the positive impact is we will have access to the market, that will increase our market access. We will have access to the huge market that this cooperation will present to us, and also it will boost our pharmaceutical and service sector. This Indian pharmaceutical sector and service sectors are very good, are in a very good position. They are having good advantage. They are very good at this services and drugs manufacturing, and if we get access to these markets, we can boost these sectors. These sectors will get lot of advantage because of their expertise in their sector, in their own area of operation. Availability of quality and cheaper goods. If we open our market, the people of India will have access to the wide goods and services. Goods and services from various countries. We will have availability of huge goods and services from various countries at the cheaper price and with good quality. And also, if we become part of this agreement, it will create lot of jobs to the Indian youth. India is a land of this 130 crore people, 1.3 billion people, and out of this 130 crore, around 60%, more than 60% are youth. They need jobs, and this RCEP agreement will provide lot of jobs that will help us to tap the demographic dividend. And it will also bring lot of revenues to the government. Increased trade will bring lot of revenue to the government in terms of tax revenue, non-tax revenue. These are the positive impacts. Now we will see the negative impacts. What are the disadvantages that we will have as a member of RCEP? That already with Asian nations we have trade deficit. Our imports are more than the exports, and also with China we have lot of trade deficit. And if we become part of it, the trade deficit will get increased. Trade deficit will get increased. That is one of the apprehensions. That is one of the disadvantages. Second is exploitation of Indian market. India is a land of 1.3 billion people. It has huge opportunity. Because of huge amount of population and also the market. And if we give access to them, that may lead to exploitation of market because of their expertise. This China and other Southeast Asian nations are very good in manufacturing. They are very good in bringing about these cheaper products. Those products will be dumped into Indian market, and that will lead to exploitation of Indian market. And second is impact on steel, textile and agriculture sector. Our farmers are also worrying that it is very difficult for us to compete on the global scale. And second is textile sector. They are also worrying about the increased competition and cheaper goods from the Southeast Asian nations and other countries. And also our steel industry is also worrying. Japan, Australia, Korea, they are leaders in steel production, quality steel production. Our companies are not that much manufacturingly strong enough, technically strong enough to compete with them. That will lead to the closure of our steel companies, because our steel companies cannot compete with those products. Okay, and also impact on domestic industry due to increased competition. If you open our market, cheaper and quality goods will come to India, and people will prefer the cheaper and quality products, and because of that the domestic industries need to be closed. If they don't face the competition, they need to close their businesses. That will lead to lot of problems. Okay, these are the positive and negative impacts. Now we will see. If India does not join the bloc, that agreement, if India does not become a part of that economic cooperation, we will see what type of impact it will have on India. The trade will come down. This RCEP, the ASEAN 10 countries plus 6 countries. Now India is not a part of it. That's why there are 5 countries. These 15 countries will focus among themselves. As a result, our trade with these countries will come down, because they will focus on among themselves. They will focus within the region, within the cooperation. That is why our trade with them will come down, and also we will miss access to the huge market. India is leader in services sector, and if you don't be a part of this RCEP, we cannot easily go and set up our software companies in China and other Southeast Asian nations. if we that market access we will miss. Okay, that is also a big, that is also one of the trouble that we get if we don't become, if we don't join the bloc. Then what is the way forward? You know, the Asian countries and the other countries, the 5 countries are already saying that still we are open for negotiations. India can come to the table and negotiate. That is why, because as a India since beginning associated with this bloc and wanted to be a part of it. That is why there is a still scope for negotiations. If it goes well, then India will become a part of it and we can reap the benefits. Okay. Indian Regional Navigation Satellite System, IRNSS. You know, recently it was recognized by IMO, that stands for International Maritime Organization, as a part of Worldwide Radio Frequency Navigation Services. Worldwide Radio Frequency Navigation Services. You know, IRNSS was recognized by IMO as a part of these services. What is IMO? You know, it is the specialized agency of the United Nations with the primary objective of ensuring safety and security of the shipping. You know, what is this recognition mean? What is the significance of this recognition by IMO? You know this? With this recognition, we can replace the US GPS, you know, dependence on UPS GPS in Indian Ocean waters. Our ships and other commercial and civilian vehicles in the Indian Ocean waters up to 1500 km from the Indian boundary, we can use our own IRNSS instead of depending on the US GPS. That is one of the important significance of this IRNSS recognition. And also it can be used by security agencies, like it can be used by this Navy, it can be used by the fishermen, the fishing vessels, it can be used by commercial vehicles that are actually transporting various things in the Indian Ocean up to 1500 km from Indian boundary. You know, this recognition placed it on par with GPS GLONASS. You know, US has its own GPS system. Russia has also its own GPS, that is called GLONASS. China also has its own GPS. You know, with this recognition, the stature of India has rise and it plays on par with these countries which are having their own regional navigation satellite system. You know, having their own navigation satellite systems. Now we will discuss what is IRNSS. It is India's regional navigation satellite system, which provides accurate positional information. It provides the accurate positional information. It tells us the information about our location. It gives us information about longitude, latitude and the altitude. Based on these 3 factors, we can calculate our location. You know, that is very important service that it provides. It provides the accurate positional information. Okay. Now we will see the salient objectives of this IRNSS. What are the main objectives of Indian Regional Navigation Satellite System? It avoids our dependency on foreign navigation satellite systems. You know this, till now we are depending on US GPS. You know, with this system we can avoid that dependency. Now we can have our own independent geospatial positioning system. And also it will provide us the accurate positional information within the Indian subcontinent. It provides us the accurate positional information within the Indian subcontinents, means up to 1500 kilometers, from Indian boundary, you know, till from Indian boundary it will provide till 1500 kilometers from Indian boundary, it will provide the accurate positional information. Okay. And what is the significance of this recognition? What is the significance of this IRNSS? You know, recently government has announced the Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative to achieve self-reliance, to achieve independence, to reduce the dependence on foreign technologies and foreign products. You know, as a part of Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative, government has taken various measures to achieve this also. And this IRNSS also helps to achieve the goal of Atmanirbhar Bharat, okay, as it reduces the dependence on foreign satellite systems. Okay. Now we will see the salient features of IRNSS. It is India's GPS like system. How US has its own GPS, it is like our own GPS system. Okay. And India is the fourth country in the world to have its own navigation satellite system. You know, US has its own navigation satellite system, that is called GPS. Russia also has its own GPS system, that is GLONASS. China also has its own GPS, that is called Beidou, B-E-I-D-O-U, Beidou. And India is the fourth country to have its own GPS, that is called IRNSS. And it is a constellation of 7 satellites. You know, IRNSS is a constellation of 7 satellites from IRNSS 1A to 1G. And out of these 7, 3 are placed in geostationary orbit and 4 are placed in geosynchronous orbit. This 7 will provide us the accurate positional information. And also, this system will be used for navigational purposes. You know, we can use it for terrestrial navigation, we can use it for aerial navigation, we can use it for marine navigation. At the same time, it will also play a very important role in disaster management. You know, we can use this navigation system for rescue and relief operations as a part of disaster management, and also we can integrate this system with mobile phone and we can use it for various purposes, and also it will provide us the mapping and visual and voice navigation services, like like Google Map. You know how Google Map is providing this voice and visual navigation based on US GPS. We can have our own GPS, we can have our own maps with visual and voice services based on our IRNSS. These are the salient features of IRNSS. Now we will see the services that it will provide. Majorly, IRNSS provide 2 types of services: standard positioning service, second is restricted service. You know what is standard positioning service? This service is available for all the users. You know, it does not discriminate. It is available for the common man, it is available for the civilian purpose, commercial purpose. Anyone with GPS device can access this service. But the restricted services is restricted. You know, the name itself says that it is restricted. It is restricted to the authorized users. The users who have permission, who have authority to use, only can use these services, like defense forces, military, air force, navy or intelligence agencies. They can use these restricted services. Okay, these are the 2 services that it provides. Now we will discuss Kerala Police Act and its recent amendment. Recently Kerala government has issued an ordinance to amend this Kerala Police Act, mainly to deal with defamation, abuse on social media platforms. You know, it is very important that there is a need to protect the dignity of an individual. You know, these social media platforms are being misused or abused by the vested interest to defame or abuse the people. That is why Kerala government has come out with an ordinance to amend this act to ensure that dignity of the individual is protected. This dignity is guaranteed under Article 21 of the Constitution of India. As a part of this, it has made the defamation a cognizable offence, and if any person is convicted, if any charges are proved against any person, there will be an imprisonment of 3 years and fine up to 10,000 rupees. And also it has conferred discretionary powers on the police, you know, to deal with these cases, you know, and also it's tried to maintain a balance between the Article 19 and Article 19 and Article 21. Article 19 means ensuring freedom of the press, ensuring free speech. Okay, there is a need to balance these 2. Okay. And what are the concerns? Why people are criticizing this and why people are worrying about this amendment? Now we will see what are the concerns that are associated with this recent ordinance. You know, as a part of this amendment, it has conferred discretionary powers on the enforcement agencies like police, and they are telling that these discretionary powers may be misused by the police. That misuse will amount to the violation of Article 19 of the Constitution. Article 19 of the Constitution, that is freedom of speech and free press. And also this amendment has included various terms that are not defined in the act. If the terms are very vague and ambiguous, and if they are not properly defined, they may be interpreted by the enforcement officers as per their subjective knowledge, as per their wish. That will lead to the violation of article 19 of the constitution. Yes, we know that protecting the dignity of the individual is very important, that is guaranteed under article 21 of the constitution of India. At the same time, it is also important to protect the freedom of the press and the freedom of the speech, that is also guaranteed under the constitution of India. Both are part of the fundamental rights. That is why there is a need to strike the balance between these two. Yes, amendment was brought to strike a balance. The problem here is discretionary powers that are conferred on the police forces. Okay? If the discretionary powers are used in the interest of the public, that will strike a balance and that will help to protect the dignity. If those discretionary powers are misused for vested interest, then that will lead to violation of article 19 of the constitution. That is the main concerns associated with this amendment and the act. You know, many people are also saying that it is similar to that of section 66A of IT Act. We all know that this section 66A of IT Act was made constitutionally invalid by the Supreme Court. You know, the Supreme Court also said the same thing. The terms that are being part of this provision were ambiguous and vague, and they are not properly defined in the act. If they are not properly defined, they may subject to lot of interpretation. Okay? That will lead to the misuse, that will lead to the abuse of these provisions and violate the freedom of the speech, and critics are also saying the same thing. Okay? Then what is the way forward? How to strike a balance between these two? You know, there is an involvement of two fundamental rights here, article 19 and article 21, and it is very important to ensure freedom of speech, and at the same time it is very important to protect the dignity of the individual. How to ensure, how to maintain balance between these two? You know, by cautious exercise of these discretionary powers. The people who are having these discretionary powers under this act should exercise those discretionary powers in the interest of the public, and in both letter and spirit. They have to use that powers, okay, in both letter and spirit. Then only we can maintain balance and it will lead to the good outcome in the society. And also, many people, due to lack of awareness, either share or subscribe or create this abusive content on the social media platforms. You know, they don't know the penal provisions. That is why in India legal literacy is very important. Many people are not aware of laws. They don't know what provisions are there. They don't know whether that will lead to the offense or not. That is why we need to create the awareness. Okay? That way also we can reduce the litigation. That is called preventive litigation. And also we can make sure that the decision before filing an FIR, the decision that need to be taken at the higher level in the police administration. You know, at the DSP level or the SP level, who are having good amount of knowledge and who are good at, you know, this using this power and authority in a public interest. Those decision making should be kept at that level, not at the station house officer level, because there may be a influence of local people or local politician or some vested interest. If we keep it at the higher level, the chances of influence have come down and that will lead to the good outcome. Okay, these three are the important suggestions that we can use it for maintaining balance between article 19 and article 21 of the constitution. Thank you.